Okay. Good morning, everybody. Okay, now, today is a different sort of day. It's not a day that we were planning to have an assembly this morning, but last Thursday, a very sad moment happened back in the UK. And Her late Majesty, the Queen Elizabeth II, sadly died last Thursday. So as a British school, we thought it was really important that we spent some time today remembering the Queen, thinking about her life and the life that she lived, recognizing perhaps some highlights of her life and some funny moments, and then pay her some respects at the end. So we're here today, if you think about our core value of respect, to pay respect to a very great lady who lived for over 90 years and sadly died last Thursday. And around the world, lots of people are paying respects in different ways to Queen Elizabeth II. And some of you, especially in our foundation class, have recognized that this is our school. And if you notice, there's something different in the flags. Put your hand up if you can see what's different about the flags. Let's see. Olivia. The British flag, if you look, is halfway down. And around the world where the British flag is flown at the moment, to pay our respects to Her Majesty the Queen, people are flying their flags at half-mast in a sign and a moment of respect and sadness at her death. Because last Thursday, at 4:30 p.m., Queen Elizabeth II died. So today, we're just going to go through a few things to share her life with you. And people share things in different ways, you'll notice. And some people might come on stage later, people with black ties. What color was my mask? And I was wearing that out of a sign of respect at the death of our Queen Elizabeth II. And so today, we're just going to share these things. And at the end, we're going to ask you to have a moment of silence to pay your respects. And we'll also share some things with you during school this week where you can pay respects to the Queen as well. So on that note, this is what Assembly is for. Let's remember that core value of respect during the day today. And this morning through Assembly, where we listen as well as we can and just listen to the story of our Queen. And on that note, I'm going to ask Mr. Kett if he can come and open us up in a word of prayer. Thank you, Mr. Kett.
Okay, if you'd like to bow your heads together with me as I say this prayer. Dear Lord, King of Kings, we give you thanks today for the life and faith of your servant, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Through times of triumph and challenge, her devotion to her country has spanned eras of incredible change. In all that time, she remained steadfast, dignified, and inspirational. On this day, when we remember the life of Queen Elizabeth at Seoul Foreign British School, the Lord who loves us reassures us with these words from the book of John, chapter 11, verses 25 to 26. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Dear God, as countless people around the world remember Queen Elizabeth's life and legacy, both today and in the days to come, may we be inspired anew to live for you in the service of others for as long as we may live. Amen. So as Mr. Freeman was saying, we're coming together today to remember and reflect on the life of Queen Elizabeth. And when I was thinking in preparation for the assembly today about the Queen, I was thinking of all the times when I've either seen her on TV or particularly around a certain time of year. And for those of you who may have spent, actually I was thinking there's not many of you who may have spent loads of time in the UK, but for me growing up, it was Christmas. And at Christmas time in the UK, there would be something on TV every year that I remember as a child called The Queen's Speech. And we'd sit around and we'd listen to the Queen's Speech. It would last normally about 10 minutes or so. And so The Queen made a number of speeches, obviously every year, but this one was one that she made actually when she first knew that she was Queen. She said, "Pray for me," she asked, "that God may give me wisdom and strength to carry out the solemn promises I shall be making, and that I may faithfully serve him and you all the days of my life." So when the Queen first knew that she was going to be Queen, she'd heard about the death of her father, these were the words that she said, and actually her promises that she made were actually sometime later. It was nearly 11 months later, she was actually had what was called her coronation, which is where they place the crown on the Queen's head and she's formally becomes the Queen in a recognised ceremony. So the Queen became the Queen on February the 6th in 1952. That was the day that her father died. And as those of you who have been looking at the news over the weekend, you'll know that as soon as the Queen died, her son, now King Charles, became king instantly. As soon as the Queen dies, the next person who's in line for the throne immediately becomes the king or queen. And this was the day when the Queen became the Queen. And her first Christmas message was of that year in 1952, because her father had been making a Christmas message every year. And I said in that prayer a moment ago about how the Queen has lived through absolutely incredible change. I don't think I can imagine quite how much change the Queen has seen in all the years that she has been Queen. But just to put it in context, when she delivered her first Christmas message, she didn't give it on TV because, there was no TV. She had to do it through the wireless, through the radio. And it was not until 1957, 5 years later, that she gave the first televised Christmas message. And actually, this screenshot on the right-hand side is from it. And it's on YouTube. So if you are interested, I had a little look over the weekend. Her first ever Christmas message is on YouTube. And funnily enough, it's a message that's all about change. She talks about how the world is changing, things are moving on a pace. She says, now I'm delivering this message to you for the first time. And she actually uses that time to reflect on the things that, of course, do naturally change. But she also talked about the things that she felt shouldn't change. Some things which are very easy to discard or pass by. She said things like religion or morals and faith and so on, things that sometimes don't necessarily seem that popular and quite boring. She thinks those are the real things we need to hold on to. We talk about them here at the British School as our core values. And all of the articles I've been reading over the weekend about the Queen and her life, so often I hear actually the language of our core values coming up again and again, about the courage that she showed, about the respect that people had for her and so on. And I'd encourage you, if you do have a moment to look at some of the articles, just start to tune in to where some of those core values are of how people talk about the Queen lived her life. When she became Queen in a formal, recognised ceremony, the coronation, she actually made 3 promises. And I'd just like to have you reflect for a moment on not necessarily what the Queen thought the 3 promises were, but I want you to, I can't even imagine it. Can you imagine for a moment that somebody turned around to you and said, you're going to be the King or Queen of the United Kingdom and of the Commonwealth? What promises might you make? Now, the Queen made 3 of them. So by all means, have a think about what the Queen might have said. I don't think I could imagine for a moment what it would be like to be King John. It'd be really weird. Some people think, you could do whatever you like. But I wonder whether it would be the opposite. I wonder whether actually it would put me in such a position of responsibility that actually it would be you'd have to be quite restricted in what you could do and say. There'd probably be all sorts of rules that you'd have to follow, more rules than you'd have right now. Anyway, I'm going to give you a minute now to use your quiet voice, because we don't want the noise level to escalate really high in here. Use the voice that you'd use to chat to somebody next to you. What might your 3 promises be if you were turned to and said, you're going to be the King or Queen of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth? What might your promises be? 1 minute, off you go. Okay, who feels that they're feeling courageous and would like to share just what one of their promises might be? One of their promises. Maya, big voice. Maya? That's great, Maya. Caring about other people. How do you think you might make them happy? What sort of things might you do as Queen Maya? That's super, Maya. Thank you very much. Let's just have a couple more. Somebody towards the back there. Is that Hannah? Yeah, go on, Hannah. Big voice. That's super. And how would you make it a better country, do you think? That's wonderful. I think being kind is definitely something the world needs more of, Hannah. Thank you very much. And I can't see the gentleman just behind Mrs. Law. I can't see you because it's so dark up there. Go on, big voice. Oh, say again, sorry. You would fight climate change. Is that Cohen? Cohen. That's really interesting, actually, because King Charles has been talking about climate change for years as well. And also, I think it'd be interesting to see what he does now that he's king around that. Because one of the things they said was, now that he's become king, he actually has to almost speak less about some things. But I wonder if that's something he'll still speak to. Thank you. All great ideas, hands down. The Queen's 3 promises were to govern appropriately, to maintain justice, and to profess the gospel of Christ. So these are the 3 promises that she made. This clip, and it's just a couple of minutes, I just wanted to share one of them, was of the Queen. And there were loads of Christmas speeches to choose from. And of course, I've only just selected like a 2-minute clip from this one. But this was at the turn of the millennium, which for those of you who were alive then, and it will be the adults sitting here in the room, in the year 2000, it was a year of great expectation and hope for the people who were living through that time. We'd gone from the 1990s and the century that passed before into a new millennium and a new decade and a new century. And the Queen delivered her Christmas message. And I want to refer to it because as a Christian school for everyone, I thought actually the Queen had some really wise words to share around her own faith and the faith of others. So if we just dim the lights a little, and we'll share this video now.
Of other great faiths. Of course, religion can be divisive, but the Bible, the Quran, and the sacred texts of the Jews and Hindus, Buddhists and Sikhs are all sources of divine inspiration and practical guidance passed down through the generations. To many of us, our beliefs are of fundamental importance. For me, the teachings of Christ and my own personal accountability before God provide a framework in which I try to lead my life. I, like so many of you, have drawn great comfort in difficult times from Christ's words and example. I believe that the Christian message, in the words of a familiar blessing, remain profoundly important to us all. Go forth into the world in peace. Be of good courage. Hold fast that which is good. Render to no man evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the afflicted. Honor all men. It is a simple message of compassion, and yet as powerful as ever today, 2,000 years after Christ's birth.
What I loved about hearing that speech again today was how it linked in so well with what you all said as well. When Maya talked about helping those who may not be able to help themselves, when Hannah talked about kindness and Cohen talked about climate change, it's actually about looking out from yourself. And I think in a day and age where you can look at other world leaders and think about how sometimes they do fall short, hearing the Queen's words about what she structures her life around, I think is a call for each of us, whatever our faith and whatever our beliefs, to think about, well, who is it that makes me who I am? I thought it was just a really important message.
Thank you, Mr. Kett. What I really enjoyed about that clip of the Queen's speech, I was listening out for words that for me had a lot of value, and I hope for you had a lot of value, because we do talk in the British school about how our values help us live good lives, and it's obvious here that the Queen was a good role model for that. She talked about having courage, if you listen to that speech. She also talked about one of SFS's Christ-like attitudes. She talked about having compassion. And I think the Queen, without a shadow of a doubt, was very courageous during her time as Queen and was very compassionate. She showed a lot of compassion to people around her and people even a long way from her. She was very compassionate. So we're going to watch. I could have stood and talked to you about lots of different events in the Queen's life. But I have to give my thanks to Miss Katie, who over the weekend found this video, which I think shares a lot about her life in about 7 or 8 minutes clip. So I just want you to sit, be respectful, show that great skill of communication, and listen as you watch and find out a little bit more about the Queen, her life, and all the values that she lived through her life as well. Mr. Black, can we play that?
The Queen, Elizabeth II, has died. As Britain's longest reigning monarch and head of the Commonwealth, she was one of the world's most important and respected leaders. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was born on the 21st of April, 1926. She grew up in Mayfair, London, and had a full and happy childhood. She was known to her family as Lilibet and loved to play with her younger sister Margaret. She was very fond of dogs, especially corgis. Though she was a princess, she grew up doing the things that many little girls do, like joining the Girl Guides. She was not expecting to become queen. Everything changed when her uncle, King Edward VIII, stepped down from the throne. Elizabeth's father became King George VI. She was just 10 years old. From that moment, she knew that one day she would wear the crown herself.
The Battle of London, which began with strong forces of Nazi bombers attacking the capital at night, led to a big fire on the waterside early in the onslaught.
When the Second World War began, many British children were evacuated away from the bombing of the cities.
A new exodus from London takes place, young people whom their parents had wisely registered for evacuation taking train for the West Country.
In 1940, the princesses were moved out of London to the safety of Windsor Castle. There, Princess Elizabeth made her first radio broadcast to children who were also living away from home, some as far as the United States and Canada.
All of us children who are still at home think continually of our friends and relations who have gone overseas, who have traveled thousands of miles to find a wartime home and a kindly welcome in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and the United States of America.
Her speech was to help keep everyone's spirits up during the hard times of war and to give everyone hope for the future.
When peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place.
Elizabeth grew up through the war, and like many other young women, she turned her skills to working for the war effort. The 18-year-old princess served as a mechanic and a truck driver in the Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service.
Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight. The German war is therefore at an end.
When the war came to an end, the royal family celebrated on the balcony of Buckingham Palace with the people. For a short time, the young princess was free of responsibility and able to do the things she loved best. But behind the scenes, she was also learning the responsibilities of the role that lay ahead of her. At 21, she pledged her devotion to the nation.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
That same year, in November 1947, she married her distant cousin, a handsome naval officer, Philip Mountbatten, in a ceremony designed to lift the spirits of post-war Britain. She paid for her own wedding dress by saving up clothing ration coupons. By the early 1950s, the king was increasingly unwell, and Elizabeth and Philip took on more of his duties. Her royal tour of Kenya was cut short when she heard the news of his death in February 1952.
Now, suddenly, the nation is stunned by sorrow.
She returned to London as Queen. A year later, preparations were underway for the coronation at Westminster Abbey. 3 million people lined the streets of London to cheer on the Gold State coach from Buckingham Palace. A special viewing space was cordoned off for 30,000 schoolchildren along Victoria Embankment. During her reign, Queen Elizabeth II saw 15 prime ministers serve Britain. She had a special relationship with each one, the first being wartime leader Winston Churchill, and most recently Liz Truss. She would meet and advise each of them, but as constitutional monarch, she had no powers to decide our laws. That's something that is done by an elected parliament. Across the world, she was a symbol of strength and unity as head of the 52 countries of the Commonwealth, many of which were once part of the British Empire. And she was also monarch to 15 Commonwealth realms. But Queen Elizabeth was also a mother. She had 4 children, Charles, Anne, Andrew, and Edward, and took great pride in her family. She had 8 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren.
The royal residence of Windsor Castle. And at the head of the Long Walk, a giant beacon waits to set in motion the nationwide celebrations of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth's Silver Jubilee.
Together, we have celebrated her important anniversaries. The Silver Jubilee in 1977, the Golden Jubilee in 2002. In 2012, she became the first British monarch since Queen Victoria to celebrate her Diamond Jubilee, marking 60 years on the throne. And we have celebrated her landmark birthdays, such as her 90th, where we enjoyed parades and parties across the UK.
Thank you very much indeed. Very big card, isn't it?
Yes, it's got lots of.
In February 2022, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Platinum Jubilee.
Thank you, Your Majesty, for inviting us to Sandringham today.
70 years on the throne, breaking all records as the longest reigning monarch in Britain's history. Her service to the country, her energy and commitment made the Queen much loved and respected by her subjects. Even though her rule stretched over a time of great change in our history, the Queen will be remembered above all for her steady leadership and dedication to the British people.
Oh, thank you.
an amazing life. 96 years old, 70 years as queen. And if you notice, her first speech to a nation was at the age of 14, where she tried to give courage to children who were evacuated from their homes during the war. What an amazing lady. Since the age of 14, she's been in the public eye, supporting people, helping people, giving advice, guiding, and just being a real pillar of strength throughout all that time, through wars, through different prime ministers. That was an amazing figure, how many prime ministers she's sort of been alongside and been with. So very hard life. And sometimes when life is very hard and very challenging, it's good to see some of the funny side of things. And you're going to hear a story now that Mr. Kett found about when the Queen was walking in the mountains with one of her guards, one of her police entourage. So have a listen to this story, because even though her life was hard and she showed great courage, great strength, she still had that funny side.
And normally on these picnic sites, you meet nobody. But there was 2 hikers coming towards us, and the Queen would always stop and say hello. And it was 2 Americans on a walking holiday. And it was clear from the moment that we first stopped, they hadn't recognised the Queen, which is fine. And the American gentleman was telling the Queen where he came from, where they were going to next, and where they'd been to in Britain. And I could see it coming, and sure enough, he said to Her Majesty, "And where do you live?" And she said, "Well, I live in London, but I've got a holiday home just the other side of the hills." And he said, "Well, how often have you been coming up here?" "Oh," she said, "I've been coming up here ever since I was a little girl, so over 80 years. And you could see the clogs thinking. He said, "Well, if you've been coming up here for 80 years, you must have met the Queen." And as quick as a flash says, "Well, I haven't, but Dick here meets her regularly." So the guy said to me, "Oh, you've met the Queen, what's she like?" And because I was with her a long time and I knew I could pull her leg, I said, "Oh, she can be very cantankerous at times, but she's got a lovely sense of humour." Anyway, the next thing I knew, this guy comes around, puts his arm around my shoulder, and before I could see what was happening, he gets his camera, gives it to the Queen, and says, "Can you take a picture of the 2 of us?" Anyway, we swapped places, and I took a picture of them with the Queen, and we never let on, and we waved goodbye. And then Her Majesty said to me, "I'd love to be a fly on the wall when he shows those photographs to the friends in America, and hopefully someone tells him who I am."
What a great story. Yeah, go on. That's a really good story. So what a great lady the Queen was. She had courage. She showed respect to lots of people. She took lots of responsibility, but she also showed a sense of humor when it was needed. She was always there to cheer people up with some story or some way of being during her life. So you've heard a lot about the Queen. So we're coming to that point in our assembly now where I'm going to ask 2 people to come and speak. And just for a little bit longer, you're doing so well, Foundation, year 1. I'd just like you to be quiet for a few more minutes as we welcome 2 people who are going to come and share a few words and are also going to ask us to be with them for a period of time over the next few minutes. So our first visitor is from the British Embassy, and I'm going to invite the Director of Trade and Industry, Mr. Tony Clemson, up, and he's going to share a few words, and then he's going to ask you to engage in a moment of silence. So please, can you welcome Mr. Tony Clemson.
Thank you, Headmaster, for inviting me. And good morning, everybody. So this is a sad moment for me personally as well as many other roles that the Queen had. I really believe that the Queen was our best ever diplomat. And that meant that she represented the UK around the world better than anybody else could. And I think we saw a speech that she did earlier in the video there. So when she was 21 years old, she said that, "I declare that my whole life, whether it be long or short, will be devoted to your service. And that's an incredible promise to make, to promise your whole life will be devoted to service. And she carried that on through her whole life. And she was working 75 years later, right up until the very end of her life. And as you've already heard, she had the same job for 70 years. Can you imagine what that must be like? And it was a job that she never asked for, and she had no choice about, and yet she always did it to the best of her ability. And during that time, she lived very much in the public eye. Everything she did, people would watch and take notice. She travelled more than 1 million miles around the world. She visited 117 countries, and she was probably the most photographed woman in history. And that's a very tough and busy life. But throughout it all, she always did her best. And in fact, she came to Korea in 1999. 23 years ago, she visited Korea here in Seoul, and she went to Andong down in the south of Korea as well. So I was talking to my son over the weekend, Arjun, here in year 6, and we were talking about what is it about the Queen that was so special? Why do people care that she has passed on? And Arjun came up with 3 reasons, which I think are perfect for today. So the first thing he said was that she was always devoted to her duty. And to me, that means that she always tried to do the right thing. Even when she personally wanted to do something else, she would do what she knew to be right. And I think we can all learn from that. The second thing he said was that she was resilient. She never gave up. So even when she made mistakes, even when things went wrong, and everybody knew because she was so photographed and everybody was watching her, she didn't give up, she carried on, and she kept on doing her best. And then the third thing that he said is that she was always positive and optimistic. And I think that's a really important one. And you've seen in the photos and the videos this morning that she's smiling, she's making people laugh, and she's trying to see the best in other people and the best in the situation. And I think that's a remarkable example for us all as well. Even though Queen Elizabeth has passed on, her son, King Charles III, is already been named as king, and so much will continue the same as before. But I do think that this is the right moment for us to stop and pause and just do 2 things. Firstly, to celebrate her life, how hard she worked, but also to think about what we can learn from her example as a role model. Think about what she did in a life dedicated to doing the right thing, to duty, a life of resilience, and a life of being positive and optimistic. And I'd like to invite us all to just bow our heads in silence, just for 1 minute, to think about what the Queen did in her life and what we can learn from that. So we'll now just take 1 minute's silence.
Okay, so if we can ask you all just to close your eyes and just bow your head in a moment's silence as a sign of respect for Her Majesty the Queen.
Thank you very much.
Children, I'm going to finish in a word of prayer. I'd ask you just to be with me as we say thank you to God for the services and the service of a great, great leader. Lord, fill this room. Fill this room with your love, your forgiveness, and your service. We thank you, Lord, for the gift of Queen Elizabeth II, for all she has done, for the country, for the Commonwealth, for the realms and territories of the United Kingdom. We ask that she and her family are with you and are able to draw upon your strength as our Saviour. And we ask you this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Okay, so far in British school, that was a very important moment for us, for the people of Britain, and for people around the world, just to pay and take that time to pay our respects to what was a great and who was a great and an amazing lady. As you leave here this morning, think about what that means for you and the lives that you lead. What examples can you take from Her Majesty the Queen and the way that she lived her life? How is that going to affect how you live moving forward? And during the week, I think some teachers may have some other things to share with you around the Queen. So try and remember those things as you go through the week. My thanks to Mr. Tony Clemson for joining us today from the embassy. Thank you very much. And also to Mr. Kett, Mr. Flanagan, and Mr. Black for helping coordinate everything as well. And for you lot out there, I thought you showed great respect. I know it's difficult sitting for a long time sometimes, especially when you're young, but give yourselves a round of applause just for showing a great amount of respect to Her Majesty the Queen. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we're going to start heading back to classes. Year 9s at the back, if you could start leading up.